We just heard from a very optimistic man. The president walked in, just had finished lunch with Senate Republicans, and my sense was a man who's confident that if people can put aside some of the extreme parts of the partisanship that we often see, that we can get some things done. He talked optimistically about what the economy is doing now, the jobs that are being created, the pent-up demand that we're now beginning to see played out as new hires throughout the country, the recovering housing market, you name it. I think the economy is trying to give us some signs that it wants to launch, and the president wants to be there to make sure that the 535 elected members in Congress and the individual American people elected to be president of the United States are ready to launch with the economy. And so his message to the members of the House Democratic Caucus were, be ready, let's work hard, let's get this done, and let's do it in a way that we bring Americans to the table to vote, not Republicans and not Democrats, but Americans to vote to improve the economy and to improve the lives of Americans. And with that, let me yield to our leader, Democratic leader, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, to you and to Vice Chair Crowley. Thank you for a very important meeting with the President of the United States and our caucus this afternoon. As the chairman said, the president came as an optimistic leader of a great nation. He talked about, in addition to what Mr. Chairman said, about a window that has to exist between elections where we just are here to get the job done for the American people. He talked about the middle class and those aspiring to it who we are here to work for to get the job done. And with some optimism that although we have our disagreements, and that's what the democratic process is about, people with differing views coming together to reach solutions, that in this window of time that we should take advantage of it to benefit the American people. It was an interesting collection of questions from our colleagues, ranging from climate change to taxation to stopping the cuts in biomedical research and what that means to the health of our nation. The president, again, was inspiring, was optimistic, was realistic, and called upon us for unity and invited any thoughts that we had on how we go forward. Being unified does not necessarily mean having no questions about each other's positions. Being a lively Democratic caucus, we had the questions, we had the unity, and we appreciated the optimism of the president. And with that, I'm pleased to yield to our distinguished House Democratic Whip, Mr. Steny Hoyer.
Well, I agree with the leader and with Chairman Becerra. The president was optimistic. The president was positive. The president was obviously pleased with the meetings that he's had, both with the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans, as well as Senate Democrats, and now House Democrats. The president indicated, as has been referenced, and I would submit, the election is over. We've had an election. We had a vigorous debate, and the American people have made a choice. We have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Republican House. He observed, and I agree, and I think all of us agree, that the sequester that has been adopted should not go forward, should not stay in place. We ought to do that in a more rational, balanced way, that we need to move forward in setting our country on an even more successful path than we are on. Good job numbers last month, 236,000 jobs. Stock market had historic highs, but in order to continue that and to grow more jobs, the president made it very clear that he understands he needs to reach out to Republicans and to work with his Democratic colleagues in the House and the Senate to make sure that we reach a balanced resolution, a resolution to move this country forward. And if we do so, he's very optimistic about the fact that we're going to do very, very well as a country, create the kinds of jobs we need, and be competitive in world markets to grow our economy. So it was a very positive meeting. I know all of us, all of our members were pleased. The president joined us, and he is positive about the meetings he's had with our Republican colleagues, and we look forward to working with them in the coming days and months. And now I'd like to yield to the Assistant Leader, my dear friend Jim Clyburn from South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whip. I agree that the president was very, very optimistic, and he was standing before a caucus of very, very optimistic members. If there's anything that I heard beyond what I thought were very, very positive questions, there was a little bit of concern from our members as to whether or not we will in any way jeopardize the future investments in our children and in the security of families going forward. And that is to include whether or not we will find ourselves postponing. I think the president used 2 years of the kind of investments in research that need to be made in order for us to assure that we stay competitive with other nations where research is such a big part of what they're doing. I would hope that as we continue our discussions, that both sides keep in mind that we ought not do anything that will jeopardize our country staying competitive and our children having the kinds of opportunities that they should have in a country as great as this. And with that, I would like to yield to our Vice Chair, Joe Crowley.
Well, thank you, Jim. If you haven't heard yet, the president was very optimistic and very positive. And I'm sure that Steve Israel will reiterate that when he comes to the podium. But if there's any doubt, right? But I think really the point that struck me was that the president talked about the need to accomplish things, that he wasn't running again for re-election. He doesn't have an election in his future. And that you have to have some period in time that we can come together and do the work of the American people and stop going from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis. That's something we've been saying for some time now. These man-made fiscal crises need to come to an end. We need to get about doing the people's business. And by the way, yes, the president was very positive. And now I give you Congressman Steve Israel.
Very optimistic. I'm very optimistic. It was an optimism caucus, ladies and gentlemen, that we kicked off. Look, the president was optimistic, but also the president was lively, and our caucus was lively. Lively in a discussion about how we continue to support and expand and grow America's middle class and working families. We'll make one final point, and then I'll tell you how optimistic things were. The president has shown literally that he is willing to meet the Republicans more than halfway by coming to Capitol Hill, shuttling back and forth here to meet with Republicans in the House and the Senate. And we will continue to try and find common ground and common sense with Republicans based on the principles that the president himself enumerated. We've got to take a balanced approach in our budgets. We've got to reduce debt. And we've got to continue making smart investments in the growth of America's middle class. We're willing to have those conversations and see if we can get things done with the Republicans and the president. But as the president said, for these generational challenges that Republicans talk about, there's got to be at least one special interest tax loophole that they are willing to consider. And we look forward to hearing them make some recommendations on where we can achieve that kind of balance. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Mr. Israel, you are the chairman of the DCCC, so it's your job to elect Democrats, and with the president coming and saying he's run his last election, but he's also committed to you to help elect Democrats. So did he explain how he would reconcile those two things between trying to work out a deal with the Republicans and not, demagogue them in order to win House seats?
Well, several things. First of all, it shouldn't be earth-shattering to anybody that a president of the United States, any president of the United States, would prefer to work with members of his party who will not block him and slam the door on any compromise, on any negotiation. There's nothing new there at all. But the president also said to us that there is a time for politics and there is a time for governing. This is a time for us to get things done. And I respect that, and I understand it. And as the chairman of the DCCC, I'll be part of that.
He can walk and chew gum as well. Yes.
Leader Pelosi, the president
to make big changes to Medicare if that's what it takes to get a grand bargain. Will Democrats stand behind him on that?
Well, I'm not sure of the characterization. I didn't hear the president say that, but I will say what we have done so far, and it has been very positive. In the Affordable Care Act, we already found over $700 billion in savings, which we put back into Medicare to increase benefits for those for the beneficiaries, to extend the life of Medicare by almost a decade, by closing the donut hole, and by providing free checkups for seniors now. They are enjoying those benefits, increased benefits now. We also had in the Affordable Care Act initiatives to look at the regional disparities, which cost us money in terms of high reimbursement for low performance. We're about quality, not quantity of services, and that report is coming out, and that's a place where more money will be saved. We've already gone down that path when you see that the rate of increase in Medicare spending, healthcare spending as relates to Medicare, has gone up only 0.4%. That is a slowing of the rate of increase, and in Medicaid, it is completely even. And again, with the regional disparities addressed, the curve will bend further in terms of lowering cost. That is one of the basic premises of the Ryan budget, that he can reach balance, although it isn't a real balance, but he has aided in his attempts to do that by the fact that the CBO has given the baseline it has given on the basis of lowering Medicare than anticipated Medicare cost. We have said and agree with the president that we can make savings in prescription drugs, $140 billion worth, in fact, that have been in the president's budget and that we support. So already we have taken us on a path that improves benefits for those who whether it's our seniors or others who benefit from Medicare and Medicaid. We have sustained the life of Medicare for a longer period of time. We have found places like prescription drugs where considerable savings can be made, and we're open to talking about how we can find other ways to save, whether that's somebody like me paying more for a copay or a deductible. But we have to be careful when we means test, because most of the beneficiaries on Medicare make $40,000 or below. Others of us can afford to pay more. So Medicare is already means tested in certain aspects of it. I think there's room for some more of that. So drastic cuts, $140 billion in pharmaceuticals. Some of the findings that are in the Affordable Care Act called for will lower the number as well. So we feel very comfortable in this. Look, we Democrats were the authors of Medicare. We are the protectors of Medicare. We want it to be sustained. We want it to be there for a long period of time. We recognize the demographics of many more people, baby boomers, who have come on and continue to come on the system. But again, we are there to make sure that it is strong. Republicans have said they are there to see it wither on the vine, and their approach is to end the Medicare guarantee in 10 years for future seniors.
The Democrats sent a message to the president today: don't go too far when it comes to Social Security or Medicare.
Well, one of the subjects that came up separate from Medicare was the question of the changed CPI that we talked about this morning. But as I said this morning, but was not reported in my view accurately, so I'll take on the press now, was that if there can be a demonstration that changed CPI does not hurt the poor or the very old, then it's something to put on the table, as you put on the table of raising tax, other things that might sustain Social Security for a longer period of time, recognizing the demographic shift that is taking place. But we have a responsibility to all of the American people. We want to invest in our children. They are our hope for the future. But we want to keep our promises to our seniors and their families and those who depend on Medicare and Social Security. But we again, unless, and the president is very clear about this, and you might want to integrate it into your questions, it's very clear: no revenue, no change in the entitlements.
Madam Leader, where do you see the process going from here? We've got the debt limit coming up in a couple of months.
Stenny, he's our time guy.
Well, I think the president has facilitated further discussion, not only between the White House and members. He's had Republican senators to dinner. He's had, my view is he's going to have other Republicans and Democrats down to the White House and other venues. He's come up here, as Javier has pointed out, coming more than halfway. Maybe, Joe, you said that.
Actually, the optimistic guy.
Oh, you were the optimistic guy. That's right. I knew somebody said it. The fact of the matter is, where do we go from here? The legislative process, democracy, is an ongoing, day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month process. Obviously, if we're going to work towards solutions to the problems that confront us, it'll have to be done in a bipartisan way. If it's not done in a bipartisan way, we've seen it doesn't get done. We've done some bipartisan efforts. VAWA is the most recent example, violence against women, overwhelmingly bipartisan bill passed. So I think the next steps, the way we go, is to continue discussions. I intend to continue to have discussions with Republicans as the leader continues to have discussions with Mr. Boehner. I think that's the way we're going to proceed. Hopefully, we are optimistic that we don't want to wear that word out, but that we can get to a place, because everyone that I talk to, Republican, Democrat, conservative, and liberal, thinks that we need to get to a different place than we are now.
Last two questions right here. Let's, whoa. Two questions right here and here. Last two.
You mentioned climate change is one of the other issues that came up. What was the president's message on that? Did he make commitments to greenhouse gas?
It was actually the last question. It was more of a statement than a question posed by our very distinguished Henry Waxman, an expert on this area. The recognition was that the president mentioned it very strongly in his State of the Union address, and Henry was just adding his voice to saying this is an important issue and that we should be addressing it and very strongly.
So no new policy commitments?
No.
Last question.
The Republicans said earlier today that the president was willing to go along with a lower corporate tax rate that would be revenue neutral. Is that a position that you would go along with? And further said that he was open to the possibility of a corporate tax rate reform that would leave out individual, in other words, not be a comprehensive tax reform.
Well, we have a number of members of the Ways and Means Committee here who I'm sure will all want to address it, but that question. But I do want to say this. The point here is that when we asked the Republican leadership if wasn't there any wasteful special interest loophole that they would close in order to reduce the deficit, they said no. They would close some wasteful special interest loopholes only to lower the rates. Well, we're not opposed to lowering the rates if we can get more people to pay taxes because we've closed loopholes. So that's a question about how we simplify and make our tax system more fair. And we don't disagree with the president that if that can be done to lower rates, okay, but not abandoning the obligation to lower lower the deficit as well. That is really important. We need revenue, and we cannot walk away from that source. It's a big source. The other part of it is that we want to be competitive in the global economy, and that's a consideration that the president put forth. But I want to yield to our distinguished chairman. We have one,
Joe Crowley as
two,
well.
at least two here.
I'll only add that if you recall, the Republicans were for closing loopholes for purposes of reducing the deficit before they were against closing loopholes to reduce the deficit. They, in fact, said that they could find $800 billion worth of tax loopholes that they could close during the discussions of the so-called fiscal cliff debacle. And I think that the Republicans were correct then. And this position they're taking now runs totally contrary to what they said before. And I hope that they don't walk away once again from that proposal that they put forward, because it could help us truly reach a landmark deal that lets us see the economy grow, Americans get back to work in bigger numbers, and quite honestly, then we can do all the other things that are so important, whether it's health care, whether it's getting climate change under control, everything that Americans believe that their leaders should do. So we hope that Republicans will remember that they were for closing loopholes for deficit reduction before they were against it.
Joe?
I would just add just very quickly, and that is the president did make reference to the fact that the rate as it exists right now for corporations does put us at a competitive disadvantage with the rest of the world, and that we have to find some way to address that. But I would just bring it back to the Republican budget that was brought out. 25% across the board limit for both personal and corporate taxes. And the dishonesty of that budget, because they never tell you exactly how they would pay for it. In order to do that, you'd have to do away, eliminate every possible expenditure, including the home interest mortgage deduction, a very popular expenditure amongst many Americans. So I think they ought to be more honest about how they would approach tax reform than they have been so far.
The leader wishes to have one last question.
Saved by the leader.
I appreciate that. I'm curious to hear what you think the president meant when he said something to the effect of, I've run my last election, because I think one way of hearing that is that he's not going to be able to be as aggressive in campaigning.
No, I don't think that at all.
Steve, you want?
Well, I think what it meant to me is the fact that he will not go back into history and be a president to run maybe for lower office again, the Senate or something else.
That's right.
But he has made it very clear that one of the things, and he did so today, that he has found himself doing in this job is studying very closely the history of our great country, and I think that's what he meant. He was reflecting on presidents in the past having done that, and that he would not do that. But I think Steve is correct. The president is a Democrat, and Democrats are going to be running in 2014, and I suspect that the president will be supportive of Democrats. I would hate to be running for re-election with my president not supporting my re-election.
Steve, let me make a comment on that, because I understand what Jim said. I think what the president meant by that was, I'm not going to do things for political reasons. I'm going to do them because they're in their best interest of our country and our people. I think that's absolutely what he meant. I don't think we can accuse him of trying to do something for political reasons to make himself look better. He's going to come forward with honest solutions that he thinks will make this country better. I think he's been doing that, and I think he's going to continue to do it.
Well, I'd just like to add to that is I don't think he's ever done anything for political reasons. But I think the point of his making that point was he didn't want other people to attribute any political motivation to what he was doing. But I think this has been a president who's been as bipartisan as any that I have seen. When he was talking about shall we say, the rough and tumble of politics in Washington, D.C. over time, and that his reading of history as a president, seeing it through those eyes, that's always been, we have differences of opinion, and they take different, shall we say, manifestations of that enthusiasm over time. When he was speaking, I was thinking of one Speaker of the House who became the President of the United States, President Polk. When President Polk was Speaker of the House, he said, this place is so out of order, I'm not recognizing anybody. So again, no matter how far back in time you go, you see the advocacy and the enthusiasm of it sometimes manifesting itself in a way that may not pass in somebody's living room when you see it on live TV, but nonetheless is part of our enthusiasm and our history for our democracy. Steve, did you want to close on that?
Yeah, very, very briefly. Look, he was very clear. He made the point that we had an election 4 months ago. The politics are behind the president. The politics are behind us. The American people want us to get things done, and he's committed to getting things done. On that vein, my final point, our friends in the Republican caucus have tried to take some umbrage about who the president called on election night and when. The American people do not care who the president called and when. They care about what the Republicans are calling for in their budgets. That's what counts, and that's what the president wants us focused on.
Since I brought up the issue, I figure I should answer. My interpretation was the president constitutionally can't run again, and I'm very optimistic about the future. But also that the election took place, and from my vantage point, their whole politics of being was about removing him from office. That did not happen, and now was the time to move forward in this period that we have before the next election and before the next presidential election to accomplish big things for the American people. That's what the president's talking about.
You may also want to talk to the decider whom he mentioned was his wife, Michelle Obama.
And she's optimistic.
Thank you all very much.